Welcome to Session 6, where we are going to look at pricing and cost analysis. Last week we spent some time looking at the doors of our business or the walls of our business to see whether we have strong walls, whether we have a strong foundation was the first few weeks together, and then putting up strong walls so that we can protect our business from those who may want to come in through ways that are other than how we should be coming into a business, which should be through the door. But one of the things that people also do with a business is they want to take a look. They want to do window shopping. And to do that, we often are looking through the windows. And in the windows, we are looking for prices. We are looking for the value that we receive. And we learn about that often through the marketing that the business does as well. When the marketing is done well, the pricing is done well, then we have the customers who will actually come through the door. And so today, one of the things in our session today we want to look at is pricing. How do we set our price? Before we do that, we want to spend a little bit of time looking at the word. And today our scripture passage is found in Proverbs 27, verses 23 to 27. And this passage says this: "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds. For riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. When the hay is removed and new growth appears, and the grass from the hills is gathered in, the lambs will provide you with clothing, and the goats with the price of a field. You will have plenty of goat's milk to feed your family and to nourish your female servants." This is a wonderful text that reminds us of how God instructs us in the work that we do, down to the smallest details. For those of us who are in agriculture and who are specifically working with animals or with crops, these verses can make a lot of sense. We need to know the condition of the flocks. We need to pay attention to the smallest one. We need to understand how to work with the cycles of the crops as the new growth appears. But for those of us who are not involved in agriculture, sometimes it's difficult to understand what meaning this verse has for us today. And one of the things that we are being instructed on is to pay careful attention to all of these things related to the work that we have been given, the work that we have been called to do to help other people to flourish. It's not enough for us to just continue doing the same thing, but we need to always be looking and paying attention and listening and observing. And that's a management strategy. That is something that we have to take time to do. One of the things we talk about is to use our brain more than our back. And sometimes we're so busy working hard that we aren't looking at the big picture. And it's important that we continue to look at the big picture. When we see here that there are different things that need to be done. The hay needs to be removed. New growth needs to be prepared for. The grass will need to be gathered in. There are different things that need to be done, and we are being told to be good managers and to pay careful attention to these things. When that happens, we can count on there being a good price. There will be a good flourishing that can take place. Enough to provide for our family, enough to take care of our employees. And that's really part of what we want to have flourish. When we talk about flourishing in our business, we're talking about ourselves, but we are mostly talking about our customers as well as our employees. Helping them to flourish is important, and God is giving us instructions in this time that riches don't endure forever. The crown is not secure for all generations. There needs to be diligent work that is done, diligent attention that is being paid. All right, when we look at pricing, we know that there are 3 ways to increase profit in a business. Only 3 ways. I've taught this for a long time, and I've never heard of anybody coming up with a 4th way, so I'm pretty confident that these are still the only 3. The first is to increase your price per unit. So one way to increase profit in your business is to increase your price, right? You sell it for $10 today. Tomorrow you sell it for $12. You should be able to increase your profit. Second way is to reduce your costs. So those are the variable costs and the fixed costs, which we'll be talking about today. If we reduce our cost, so we sell it for $10, we're not going to raise the price, but in this point, case, we're saying it costs us $7 to produce it. We're going to try to bring that down to $6, and so it increases our profit. The third way is to increase our sales, the number of units of your product sold. So in this case, our price is $10. We're not going to increase the price, nor are we going to decrease our costs. So our cost is still $7. We're selling it for $10. But instead of selling 100 per month, we're going to try to sell 120 per month. And so that is the third way to increase our profit. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, which of these three is the easiest for us to do? Which of these three is the easiest? So I would like for you to pause and to discuss, which do you think is the easiest for a business to do and be successful? That's the second part of it. What is the easiest to do and be successful in actually increasing the profit? So pause it for a few minutes and then discuss, and then come back and we'll continue on. Okay, I wonder what you came up with. Let's go through each of these three from the perspective of what is possible and practical to be able to do in the most easy way. Increasing your price per unit. A lot of people say, well, that's easy to do, but it's not as easy to be successful in doing it, because people like to have fixed prices. They don't like to understand the forces of the market and the different things that you're struggling with in covering your costs. So increasing your price is an easy thing to do, but not likely to be terribly successful. The second one, reduce your costs. This is the one that I would say is the easiest to do. And it's because it's not dependent on the customer responding. It's dependent on you. So looking very closely at your costs. What can we do to reduce the amount of cost that we have to increase our profit? That's solely within our power to control and not on the part of the customer. The third one, to increase your sales. That would be great, right? But of course, if we could increase our sales easily, we would be doing that. So again, that's dependent on the customer. It would be dependent on marketing. It will be dependent on a few other things that will need to happen in order to be successful for that. So really, the second one, reducing your costs, is the easiest thing to do and be successful at, but they all three are legitimate ways to increase profit in a business. Why is pricing important? Pricing really does take a good amount of time and effort to figure out how to do this well. It's not just about numbers, but it's about a strategy. It's about looking at the numbers in a number of different ways. But remember, your customer wants the lowest price, while you want potentially the highest price to be able to do what you want to do with the business. And so there's a strategy to it. You need to keep the end goal in mind. And what is your end goal? Again, we've been teaching that profit is not the goal, but it's a means to that goal. And so if you are wanting people to flourish, if you are wanting your employees to flourish, what is a strategy that you can use to help your customer, your employees, as well as yourself and the business flourish? That takes a strategy. The price that you sell per unit conveys a certain message to your customer. What sort of message do you want to convey about the product? So, if I told you that I bought a car for $1,000 US, or I told you I bought a car for $20,000 US, immediately you would have a picture in your mind of what type of car I bought in each scenario. So your price does convey a message, and you need to think about the type of message that you want to convey. Is it about quality? Is it about availability? Is it about trendiness? What is it that your price will convey? The third point, of course, of why it's important is that it determines your profitability. And you have goals for yourself and your business in terms of growing the business, in terms of caring for your family. Your price is important because it will determine how profitable you are. A good pricing strategy maximizes profits while providing the greatest possible value to the customers. And that's really the tension in pricing. It's about pleasing all the different shareholders in the business as you can. And so when we look at some of the definitions, we see that revenue is the price per unit times the number of units sold. Okay, so your revenue is, let's say you're selling suits as a tailor. Let's say you sell them for $25 per unit. You sell 10 units in a month. Your revenue is going to be $250, right? So $25 times 10 units sold is $250. Your profit, though, is less than that, right? Because we need to take your total revenue and we need to subtract out your total cost. So if your revenue is $250, maybe it takes you $175 to produce those 10 suits. It means your total profit will be $75. And that's something that, again, sometimes people make errors in really looking at their total cost of what it takes to produce. They look at, they don't include everything, and that's what we want to do with this session. Your price must cover your costs, called the unit cost, to produce and to sell your product or service, and it must meet your income goals, the salary or the owner's draw, which we will be discussing shortly. So those are some of the terms that we want to become more familiar with. Your revenue, which is your price per unit, times the units sold, and your profit, which is your total revenue minus your total cost. If you need to pause to go over this again, feel free to do that. Your price must make a profit for your business. Otherwise, you're doing a charity. I remember I was working with a woman one time in Nigeria, and she was running a pharmacy next to a hospital, and she told me that her husband had to keep injecting money into the pharmacy, and she was doing a small clinic as well, because she just was not able to make a profit. And my message to her was, you need to decide whether or not you're running a charitable organization, an NGO, or a business. If you're not making a profit, then you're running an NGO. And that's okay. It may be the thing that God is calling you to do in a particular area, but if it's not, then you're going to have to change your strategy in some way. Your price also must appeal to your customers and keep them coming back to your business. And so it needs to be good to all involved. There are some pricing pitfalls that people face. The one is using competitors' prices without making sure that they're profitable for your business. So you see what other people are selling and you say, well, therefore I must do that. I remember one time I was teaching a class in Liberia, and two men had come to class with the exact same tie on. They were wearing the exact same tie. And I heard them discussing during the break about where they got their tie. And, they had checked the labels. It was the exact same brand name. And one person said, I bought this tie for $1. And the other person said, what? I bought the exact same tie and I paid $10 for it. After some more discussion, they concluded that both prices were fair prices. How can that be? Just because one person has a different price than another person does not mean that there is price gouging or unethical behavior going on. What they ended up realizing is that the person who bought it for $1 bought it from a man who had a wheelbarrow full of ties and was walking up and down the streets of Monrovia selling ties out of the wheelbarrow. The person who bought it for $10, the exact same tie, went to a boutique. This was a boutique that had security guards outside. This was a boutique that had air conditioning inside. This was a boutique that you could have parking and park your vehicle and go inside. And you could always find the boutique. You knew where it was. So the overhead for the person who owned the boutique was much higher. The person who was walking around with the wheelbarrow full of ties didn't have the same overhead. And so he or she was able to bring the prices down a lot further. The problem is it's not convenient. You can't always find that person when you want to buy a tie. You have to run across them. You don't know the quality you're getting, and so on. And so we can't always use competitors' prices, assuming that that's just what the market's going to bear. Some people are willing to pay for the convenience of being able to park, the convenience of location, the convenience of air conditioning, and that will cause a price to go up. Another common pricing pitfall is believing that it doesn't cost that much to produce a product or service, and that is the undervaluing of our time. And so we create something, and as long as we get our cost out of the product, of the materials that we put in, we don't really assess the amount of time that went into that and the need for compensation for that time. And so we really do need to calculate whether it's worth our time. If we're sewing a suit and it takes us 5 hours, what is the value of that time? And are we getting the best price for our value, given that our time is one of our non-renewable resources? We don't get to have time back. The third is guessing the price at which to sell a product without really developing a strategy, without really sitting down and doing the math, and that can cause a challenge. Another pricing pitfall that people have is setting prices lower or negotiating too much in order to get the business. Sometimes when we're starting a business and we're competing for a contract or a tender, you may need to go below what it actually costs you. Take a loss for a contract in order to get your name out there and to get your foot in the door. But you can't do that on a regular basis. Many of the places where we are working in Discipling Marketplace Leaders is a negotiating market, which means people will start with their first price and they will negotiate to what their last price is. But sometimes on a given day, and you're desperate to make a sale, you have a family that needs to be fed, you may feel compelled to sell more often below your cost, and in the end, that's going to put you out of business. And so you need to know what your first price is, so that you can behave ethically, but you also need to know what your last price is, so you don't go below what you will need in order to recoup those things that you are selling. And so that's critical to know those. Another pricing pitfall is a failure to anticipate increases in overhead costs. That means the price that you have put on your product is so tight that should transport, the price of petrol or gasoline, go up even a little bit, suddenly you're operating at a loss. And we do know that things most of the time continue to go up. And so without having any sort of buffer in there, that will allow even for some increase and some decrease over time, you may be operating at a loss more quickly than you realize. And then this last one here is very important, and that is failing to allow for repair, maintenance, and replacement of equipment. And I've seen that break down a lot of businesses. Everything that we use in a business will be subject to depreciation, to going down in value, to losing value. There's only one thing in this world that goes up in value, and that is land. And even that, occasionally, if there's war and whatnot, it will go down in value. But most of the time, land will go up in value, but everything else goes down. And so if your customer is not paying for some of that in your price, then when that equipment breaks down, you will end up paying for that and not your customer. And so allowing that to enter into the price, the depreciation that comes with the materials that you are using, could end up putting you out of business if a customer doesn't see that as part of their price. So how do you set your price? You need to determine what your target customer base is willing to pay for the product or service. That means you need to go shopping and see what other people are doing and see the differences in qualities and the differences in variable costs, the costs that people are sourcing their goods from, the overhead costs, what type of prices are being set in different neighborhoods. What is your target customer? Means you need to know who your target customer is, what are they willing to pay for your product or your service. You need to evaluate how your company's product is perceived in the market. Is this an entry point? Is it new and kind of exciting to have? That will allow for the price to be a little bit higher. If it's something that's been around for a long time and doesn't hold a lot of value and is actually beginning to be replaced by newer models, again, people will not want to pay a lot for that. They will see that as an older product that will cause the price to go down. You need to think through whether the product is highly visible or is it frequently shopped and compared. And so these are some things, again, where you need to know your product. To buy sugar, for example, most people will buy that anywhere. They don't do a lot of comparison. If you sell sugar, I'll buy it. And so it's highly visible and frequently shopped. But if I'm buying a computer, that's something that I don't buy very often. And when I do a lot of comparison. I want to look at different makes and models and how many gigabytes of storage, and what is the processor, and all of these different things. And again, that will impact your price. And so if it's something that people buy everywhere and don't really do a lot of comparing, the price is probably going to have to be pretty close to other people. But if you have a product that is different in some ways and people will compare, you can set your price differently based on the differences that you have in your product. And so we want to come now to doing a cost analysis. You must know the cost of your product so that you can work out a good selling price per unit. To make money in business, you must make sure that the selling price of your product is more than the cost of making it. Now that sounds like a very obvious statement, right? Most business people would say, oh yeah, absolutely. But knowing our cost is not as easy as we might think, which is why we want to look more closely at the different types of costs that we have in doing our business. So there's 3 different terms that we want to take a look at. The first term is called variable costs. This sometimes, by different people in different arenas, they will call it a cost of goods sold, or the direct cost, or the cost of sales. These are what it costs you actually to create or make the product or perform the service that you are doing. We call those variable costs because they vary. Those costs vary based on the number of sales that you may have in a given time. Okay, so it's your cost of goods that are sold. What is your cost? But it varies. If you have sold a lot, your cost will be higher. If you have sold little, your cost is going to be lower. When we're talking about variable costs, we are talking about the costs of the thing that the customer actually takes away with them. So when you think about your own business, what is the customer taking away with them? What is it that went into that product? And so if you are thinking about, again, being a tailor and you're creating a suit, the customer is taking away the material, as well as thread, as well as a zipper, as well as a button, maybe some of the embroidery that may be on it, and the bag that the item goes away in. All of those things become the variable cost. Okay, so obviously, the more sales you have of that, the higher your total cost of material and zippers and other things will be. The lower your sales, the less you will have of those. And so that is what your variable cost is. The next one that we want to look at is your fixed cost. This is also called by some your overhead costs, or your indirect costs, or your administrative costs. We call those fixed as opposed to variable because these costs are something that you have to pay regardless of sales. So it doesn't vary based on sales. It's fixed. You have to pay it. And it includes the following. Rent, your electricity bill, your security bill, those types of things. And those are the costs that are required to be paid at fixed amounts daily, weekly, quarterly, semi-quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. These are costs you pay whether you sell anything or not. These costs generally are not discretionary. You don't have much say in them. You don't have an option of negotiating the price down like you do with some of your variable costs. And so an example would be rent. Your landlord doesn't really care whether you had any sales or not. You don't get to pay based on the number of sales. You pay on a monthly basis or an annual basis. And so that is what we would call a fixed cost. It doesn't mean that the price is always the same. Your electricity bill probably varies month to month, but you don't get to negotiate it. That's something that you just need to pay regardless of the sales that you have. And so these are things that we want to think through. What are the bills that we have? And this is where I find that most people know their variable costs. They know that this is what it costs me in terms of variable costs to create this particular item. But what we forget to factor in are those annual costs. If we have rental insurance, if we have to register our business annually, if we have health insurance that we're paying for any employees, taxes that are being paid. And that's why we have to look at things from a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annual level to really make sure, because all of that needs to fit into your price. If it doesn't, then you're eating into your profit. And that actually is not defined as profit. That's a cost that you have, and it's an expense that the customer should be paying for. So it's really important that you take your time to think through, what are all your fixed costs? What are you fully paying for transportation, for the loading and unloading of your goods, and the storage of your goods and things like that. The last thing we want to look at, part of the fixed costs that we want to look at is something that I mentioned earlier, and that is depreciation. And that is the fact that the price of everything will go down, or the value of everything will go down over time. Depreciation is calculated for fixed assets. Fixed assets are assets owned by the business that cannot be turned into cash as quickly as current assets. These items usually were purchased for a certain price, but go down in value, or they depreciate over time. And so those are things that we need to factor in as well. So we looked at the assets that we have, items that our business uses, machines, or a motorcycle or a car for delivery, that those things depreciate over time and will need to be replaced. And so the price has to have some of that depreciation in it. Otherwise, when it comes time for you to replace it, it will be difficult for you to do that. How do we figure out depreciation? Well, your government probably has very detailed terms of the terms of what you can depreciate for how long. So you can go that route. You can contact your Ministry of Commerce and find that out for each item. But generally, the easy way to do it is to use the following formula of cost divided by the duration that you expect to own that item for. And some of those things do vary, and that's why the government puts down what you can use, because something has to be defined. But if we looked at an example of a motorcycle, for example, if I drive a motorcycle as a taxi, and I give it to somebody to drive, that person may be a little rougher on it than if I'm using a motorcycle just for my personal use. And so if I use it for my personal use, I can make it last for maybe 4 years. But somebody who's using it as a taxi and maybe putting 3 or 4 people on it, that motorcycle might be used for 12 to 24 months. And so that's why there's some variation in there. And what we want to do is really look at the costs divided by what we think we can make work over the time period that we want to assign for it. So, for example, I have a motorcycle. I bought it for $2,400 US. I expect it to last. It's a pretty good motorcycle at $2,400. I expect it to last 2 years or 24 months. Then I have to ask the question, what is the monthly depreciation amount? Okay, and so assuming that you're fairly fast with math, or you can do use a calculator, 2,400 divided by 24 months is $100. So every month that you own that motorcycle, its value goes down for $100. That means if I want to see this motorcycle that I bought 12 months ago, I can't say that motorcycle that I've been using for 12 months now is still valued at $2,400. I have to do 12 months times $100 is $1,200 and subtract that from my purchase price. So I bought it for $2,400. I've used it for 1 year. I expect it to be good for 1 more year. That value of that motorcycle right now, the only thing that I can say really is that it's valued at about $1,200. And that means that I need to be setting aside that amount of money so that I can replace that motorcycle. So if I have a motorcycle and I'm using it as a taxi and it depreciates $100 per month, what I want to then do is take a look at how many days am I using it, and I can calculate then how many days, how much it will go down per day. Then I can look at the number of riders that I have. Maybe I take 10 people per day. And again, I can calculate that each person, each customer needs to pay approximately so much of the price that they pay is for depreciation of that motorcycle. It takes a little bit of time to figure out, but that's why we say that this is not just pulling numbers from the air. You need to really assess what it is that a customer is using and make sure that that is added to the price. We've been talking about tailors. We could say that A sewing machine might last for 10 years, might last for 20 years. And so the amount of depreciation is going to be very low. But there are other things that the customer isn't walking away with the electricity to run the sewing machine. They are obviously walking away with a piece of the sewing machine, but those need to be added to the price. After 24 months, they become salvage value. If my motorcycle is still working after 24 months, it doesn't mean that it's valueless. Now we just changed the term to being a salvage value, that it still has value, and is still also being used. So that covers our variable cost and our fixed cost. And this is where a lot of people now want to have the fun, is profit. So you want to make sure your variable cost, all of it is covered. You want to make sure that your fixed cost, all of it is covered. Now we need to look at the profit. Profit is the amount that you earn from sales after covering your fixed and variable costs. When calculating profit, make sure to consider these subsections within profit. Again, there's a big strategy for how to assign profit and what you will do with the profit. And so we want to look at all these different subsections for profit. First is business goals or reinvestment. With the profit earned, it is wise to reinvest in the business if you want it to reach your business goals. Almost every business owner that I talk to wants to grow their business. Now, often we want to grow it in terms of profit, not necessarily in terms of size. But you often need to grow the business in order to grow the profit. So it's wise to use some of your profit to reinvest back into your business. There are some people who go into certain businesses, usually it's not their main one, but they have a secondary or even a third business that they're running, and they say for the first 5 years, 100% of the profit is going to go back into that business to keep it growing and growing and growing. When you don't do that, when you take all the profit from your business and you use it, your business will remain at the same level and not grow. And that might be okay for you. Maybe that's all that you want it to do, is to help put food on the table, put children to school. But if you want your business to grow, it's important that a portion of your profit goes back into the business. Savings. Portions of the profit set aside in a respected, registered bank or credit union that can generate interest for later use. Now, it's recommended for every family as well as for every business that you have 3 months of your fixed costs set aside for emergencies. And so if your country has a crisis, right now as I'm taping this, we have the coronavirus going on, and many businesses are having to shut down. You don't want your business to go under because of those things. You want to be able to continue to pay the rent, to pay salaries, to pay your electrical bills, even if you're not making sales. And so having an emergency savings of 3 months of your fixed cost is very wise to do. Have it in a place that's safe, that you can get to it, still collecting interest, but 3 months of your fixed cost is what is recommended. Every business owner also wants to have a salary. And we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about the budgeting, but I want to go a little further with this. We recommend that every business person, owner, puts themselves on a salary for their business. Unfortunately, however, that term salary is what's can be a little misleading. And when we come to the reality of working out your profit, we prefer to use the term owner's draw. And that is the portion that's withdrawn from the company's profit for the owner. What's the difference between an owner's draw and a salary? Well, a salary is something you get regardless of sales. So even if your business is closed right now for coronavirus, your employees still want to be able to make their salary, even if you have no sales. And that's their right as long as they are employed. If you lay them off, that's something different then. But for an owner, you don't want to claim this right to a salary and begin taking out of the assets of the business. And so if the business has no sales, you as the owner should be wise and say, I better not take a salary this month. And so that's the disadvantage of that. But the advantage is when a business is doing really well, and on those months that you are making much more profit, you can take more. You have the right as the owner to take more. And so we want to call it an owner's draw, because it takes away that expectation of no matter what, I get my salary, and moves it more towards the fact that you get to draw money when it's doing well, and you shouldn't draw money when it's not doing well. But knowing how much you're going to take is where we need to figure out what is the minimum amount that I may take, what is the maximum amount that I may take, and stay within those bounds so that we aren't just moved by whatever need or demand comes on us. Cash requirements for loan principal payments. Some of us have business loans that we need to pay. The profit usually is going to cover some of those loans because it's not part of your variable cost or your fixed cost. And so making sure that you have those covered needs to come out of the profit. Then we have business gifts or corporate social responsibility. And one of the things we talked about was the social bottom line. And some people do that actually through monetary. We talk about social bottom line as loving your neighbor. You can love your neighbor in many different ways, but some people choose to give gifts, financial gifts to their community. And those are making sure that you are doing good things to the community in light of your business being there. How can you contribute back and be part of the family of the community, so to speak? And so you may want some of your profit to be allocated towards that. So our formula for pricing is price equals your variable cost plus your fixed cost, and that should include your depreciation. Now we pull that out specifically because we don't want you to forget to include depreciation, plus your business goals, plus your savings, plus your owner's draw. So that's what your price needs to equal. It needs to equal all of those different things, your variable cost, plus your fixed cost, including depreciation, plus your business goals, plus your savings, plus your owner's draw. All of that is what you need to take into consideration when making your price. So your formula for pricing per unit, in order to figure out what it might be, you would take your variable costs, and that means that you would need to figure out how much do you spend in a month for your variable costs, okay? How much material or zippers or thread are you buying? What are your fixed costs, including depreciation? So how much are you paying for electricity, for salaries, for water, for security, for the depreciation on the sewing machine, and so on? And then profit. What is it that you have said per month that you need for business reinvestment, or for your own owner's draw, or for a loan that you've taken? And then you divide that by the number of units that you might sell in a month, and that should give you your price per unit. And what I have found often is that when people do this, they actually find out that they're selling for below what they should be selling in order for them to achieve the goals that they want. And then they have to either change their goals for profit. Usually that's the only one that's more flexible, or they need to increase their number of units, or they can reduce their cost. If the price per unit you've calculated does not cover all of the above items, the business will end up paying for it somehow. And again, that's not a healthy scenario. So I'd recommend that you pause right now to take a look at that. Add up what your variable costs are. Add in your fixed costs with your depreciation. Add in what you're looking for on a monthly basis for profit. Divide that by the number of units that you typically sell in a month, and figure out, is the price per unit with that formula equal to what you are actually selling? And if you're selling it for less than that, then something needs to change. And again, only 3 ways to increase your profit. You increase your sales, right? Or you increase your price, or you reduce your cost. So if you're not happy with how this is looking, then look at those 3 again to figure out what you can do differently. Our last thing that we want to talk about in this session is your break-even analysis and the target point that you may look at. And for some businesses, this is a very helpful thing to know of, not for all businesses, but for some. How much do you need to sell in order to break even? And by breaking even, we're meaning no loss, but no profit either. So in order for you to get to that point where at least you've covered all your costs, your variable and your fixed, but you're not on the profit yet, how many units do you need to sell? So break-even means no profit, no loss. The break-even point is the number of units you need to sell to cover your fixed and variable costs, depending on your price per unit. And so here we see a formula, and we'll go through an example, where the break-even point equals your fixed costs. So how much are your costs per month, your fixed costs, divided by your price per unit, minus your variable cost per unit. So let's look at an example of what that might look like. Let's again go back to a tailoring shop. And let's say that our monthly fixed costs are $250. So every month we're paying $250 for our rent, for our utilities, for some transport that doesn't factor into the variable cost, and so on. Then our price per unit, we're selling each suit for about $30 US. Our variable cost, what we pay for in the material and the transport for getting the materials, the zippers, the thread, the depreciation and things like that, all of that comes to about $20 per unit. That means we're making in profit about $10. Okay, so $250 divided by $10 gives us 25 suits. So in 1 month, for me to just break even, cover my variable costs and my fixed costs, I need to sell 25 suits in a month. If I want profit, of course, then I need to go to 26, 27, and so on in order to help me cover that profit. So this may be a helpful thing for you to do. These are all in your workbook, these calculations. And what I would encourage you to do together in your small groups is to look at, first of all, this one right here. Take a look at your formula for pricing, and really take a look at what are your most popular items. Some of you may be selling many, many things. So take a look at some of your most popular items and do the formula to see how you're doing with that. If you're able to figure out your break-even analysis, then I would encourage you to do that as well, and that might be helpful. The last thing then is, if you are wanting to know further, in order to get your target profit, you can look at what do you need for your goals, the reinvestment of your business, your owner's draw, savings, loan payments, and gifts, and that will give you your target profit. And then you can go further to then define how much do I need to sell in order to get my target profit. So again, if my fixed costs are $250, if my target profit is another $250, that's $500. Price per unit is still $30 per suit, $20 for the variable costs. That means for $500 to cover that, I would need to sell 50 suits in order for me to make my target profit. And so that means my break even is 25 suits. My target profit is 50 suits. And of course, that's where I'm going to want to shoot, is towards that 50. It means by the middle of the month, I better be at 25 or I'm not going to make it to my 50. And so it helps you to know some of these things to help you stay on track. So I hope that's helpful, and take some time now to go over this in small groups together to see if you are charging a good price and if the price is meeting what your goals are. Thank you so much. Your assignment for next week is to do the break-even point and the target profit worksheet. You will see that in your manual, as well as the pricing policy and the terms of sale worksheet. Again, knowing what your terms of sale is very important. Many people believe that they must give things on credit, and that's great, but if people aren't repaying you, it becomes a significant problem for the business. So knowing what terms of credit to offer, terms of sales, and how to work that out in your business is important. One quick story here. There was a woman that I was working with. She was offering credit to people and really was realizing that she just couldn't afford to keep giving people one chance. And then if they don't pay it back, they don't get a chance again. So she put a sign up that said under new management when she realized that God is the owner and she's the manager. And so having her business under new management, she was able to say no more credit offered. And when people wanted to fuss with her about that, she said, "I'm sorry, it's not me, it's the new management." She basically said, "I consulted with God. He gave me permission to say this. If I want to protect the business, I can't be offering credit like I was. Putting a sign up takes the pressure off of me. And it is under new management, under God being the owner, and he wants me to protect this business so I can keep doing it to help more people flourish." So that's one creative way of looking at it, how to set those boundaries, but also understanding that terms of sale can be complicated. All right, we will see you next time. Thank you.